Perfect, thank you. Good afternoon. We will now call to order the regular council meeting of Monday, November 3rd, 2025 at 1 p.m. We'll begin with the land acknowledgement. We respectfully acknowledge that the township of Kapamonaghan is located on the Treaty 20 Mississauga territory in the traditional territory of the Mississauga Anishinaabe. We offer our gratitude to First Nations for their care for and teachings about these lands. May we honor these teachings. I'll look to council for approval of the agenda before us today, moved by Councilor Burns, seconded by Councilor Natchop. All in favor? That is approved. Any disclosures of pecuniary interest? Seeing none, there is no closed session today, so we'll move right into 6.1. Daryl Abbs, who is joining us remotely from Watson and Associates about our 2025 water, wastewater rate study and financial plan. Daryl, can you hear us okay?
I can hear you. Thank you.
We can hear you as well, so I'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Really appreciate it. Pleasure to be before yourself and council. My apologies I couldn't be there in person, and I appreciate the accommodation. So today we're going to be going over the water and wastewater rate study and financial plan presentation. And it'd be similar to the presentation from the previous council meeting. Just want to reiterate some of the points for yourselves and for the public regarding how we came to the recommended rates that we've put together. Next slide, please. And next slide. And so when we're putting together a water and wastewater rate study, the intent is to say, well, let's look past what our current budget requirements are and let's look into the future out 10 years. And let's try to understand if there's any capital operating impacts that we foresee could be coming in the next 10 years so that we could start to plan for those now. So you can kind of think of this exercise like a long-term financial plan for the water and the wastewater systems. And so what we need to do is first start with the current operating and capital budgets, understand your current system, and then we work with township staff to build what that forecast is over the next 10 years. Next slide, please. And so water and wastewater systems are heavily legislated, and ever since the Walkerton crisis that occurred in the early 2000s, there's various pieces of legislation that has been introduced. Some have been introduced and repealed, some have been introduced awaiting regulations. Ultimately, the intent of all of these pieces of legislation are to ensure that municipal councils are properly funding their systems so that we can avoid another Walkerton. And so really when we're looking at long-term financial planning for water and wastewater systems, what we're looking at is this principle of full cost recovery that comes out of those pieces of legislation. In addition to that, there are some other requirements. Municipalities have undertaken municipal infrastructure strategies, and as well the Infrastructure for Jobs and Prosperity Act that came out in 2015, which requires municipalities to undertake asset management plans. Most recently, the requirement is to ensure that you have a financial strategy to properly pay for and replace the assets in that asset management plan. And so with all that, you could see the whole thing of the principle of full cost recovery, making sure that we're maintaining and operating the system effectively, and also incorporating the asset management plan requirements. Next slide, please. And next slide. And so when we take a look at your current rate structure, again, this is the most common rate structure we see across the province. You have a base charge that's paid every 2 months, and then you have a volume charge based on how much water you use. And so when we look at a typical residential customer, that 15 to 18 millimeter size meter, they'll pay $69.35 every 2 months. And then on top of that, $1.94 per cubic meter of volume used. On the wastewater side of things, it's $128.36 every 2 months, and then $2.65 per cubic meter used. There's also a bulk water rate at $3.28 for those businesses and such that purchase water in bulk. Next slide, please. And so as the starting point of the analysis, we take a look at where you are currently today. So we need to look at your current customers. So you have about 984 water customers and 973 wastewater customers with majority of those customers being in that first meter size, so mostly residential customers. Next slide, please. And so as part of the analysis, what we need to do, and I'll talk a little bit about how we calculate the rate in a few slides, but we need to look at how many customers you're going to have over time and how many billable volumes you're going to have over time. And so in working with township staff, we're also undertaking the development charge background study at the same time. Unfortunately, there's been some legislative changes that have just come out again that have delayed the process a little bit, but we have been able to start preparing that growth forecast. And so what we're looking at is growing from about 984 customers by the end of the 10 years, getting up to 1,823 customers. On the volume side of things, so how much billable volumes we would have is about 187,000 cubic meters of volume, going up to just under 309,000 cubic meters of volume. And one of the things we've done is, as part of the development charge background study, we look at the growth forecast over a 10-year period. And so what we've done is we've kind of slowed down the growth in the first half of the forecast and picked it back up in the back half, because we understand that currently there is a bit of a slowdown in development across the province and across the country, really. Next slide, please. On the wastewater side of things, again, similarly, we take a look. We have 973 customers currently, going up to 1,812 by the end of the forecast, and going from about 159,000 cubic meters of billable volumes up to 281,400. Next slide, please. And next slide. So that becomes important when we're looking at the rate calculation. So we're gonna take a look at the capital budget. So how much we need to spend on the capital costs, so water main replacements, etc. And then we're going to look at the operating expenditures. So what are those day-to-day operating costs that we need to maintain and operate the system? We're going to deduct any other operating revenues we might get. So some of the sale of the bulk water, some of the other fees, fines, fares, things like that. And then we're going to have is how much we need to recover from the rates. Next slide, please. And so we take what we need to recover from the rates. And in part, we recover some of that from the base charge, but we take the remainder and we divide it by the total metered volumes to come up with that per cubic meter rate that we impose for water and for wastewater. Next slide, please. And next slide. And so when we're looking at those capital needs, again, taking that principle of full cost recovery, we not only looked at the 2025 capital budget, we work with township staff to understand what the next 5 years, next 10 years are, and incorporated that asset management plan that you just recently completed. Next slide, please. And so what we've come up with here on the water side is about $23 million in water projects. You can see basically top of the list there is water main replacements. And this does incorporate the recommendation from the previous council meeting to take the 10-year water main replacement schedule and replace it over a 5-year period. And then what we have here is identified on the right-hand side is how we're going to pay for that. And so there's about 12.9 million in grants from a recent grant that the township just received, about just over $1 million in DC reserve funds. 4.4 million is identified in growth-related debt, which means it's external debt that would be issued, typically through Infrastructure Ontario, but paid for with development charges. And then 4.7 million from the water reserve. And so you'll see that the current reserve doesn't have enough money to pay for that. And so as part of the rates, we're identifying transfers to build up that bank account to be able to pay for these capital needs. Next slide, please. On the wastewater side, we have just under $47 million. IOC 4.4 million from the DC Reserve Fund, 36 million from growth-related debt. So again, external debt funded with development charges. This is generally related to that wastewater treatment plant for the most part, and the new sewage pumping station in Force Main, which are at the end of the forecast period. But I will talk about the importance of the anticipated debt requirements in a little bit. And that leaves about 6.4 million to come from the wastewater reserve. Next slide, please. And this just summarizes that of all the capital financing options we've basically used all of them that we can. And so we've looked at using your existing reserves, development charge reserve funds, external debt, operating budget transfers, which means taking money from the rates and putting it into the bank accounts, and then grants as well. Next slide, please. And so when we're starting off, again, we want to look at the starting point of the bank accounts and how that's going to change over time. We're starting off with about 1.73 million in the capital reserve for water, about 1.8 million in the capital reserve for wastewater, and then we have deficits in the development charge reserve fund, about 619,000 for water and 644,000 for wastewater. Now, this is fairly common with municipalities, as development charges are recovered as units are built. The water and wastewater infrastructure needs to be invested for and paid for upfront. So typically, most municipalities do have deficits in these reserve funds. Next slide, please. So this table just summarizes what I just mentioned, how we're paying for that 23 million in water and 47 million in wastewater. Next slide, please. And so building off that, and it was kind of presented in those schedules implicitly, but I just wanted to pull this out because it is very important. And it is part of those capital costs we just talked about. The asset management plan identifies that you have about $27 million worth of water assets, $43 million worth of wastewater assets. And if you were to either save or spend that money, what that equates to is about $381,000 annually for water, or about $540,000 annually for wastewater. So what's incorporated into the calculations is that if we're not spending that money annually, that 381,000 for water or 540 for wastewater, we're putting it aside so that we do have the money to replace things when they need to be replaced. Next slide, please. On the operating cost side of things, what we did was we took a look at the current budget and then added inflation to build that up over time. We've identified 2% for most things, 5% for things like hydro, utilities, materials, and chemicals. They tend to increase at a faster rate. Next slide, please. And so what we see for the operating budget is on the water side, so going from about $477,000 going up to 721,000 by the end of the forecast period, and that's represented in the blue bar. And then the capital related component, which is either debt payments or putting money into those bank accounts to be able to pay for the capital needs. And so in total, what we see is going from about 1.67 million all the way up to 2.4 million by the end of the forecast period. Next slide, please. On the wastewater side of things, we're going from about 1.68 million up to about 5.8 million. And that's because the need for some growth-related debt that gets incorporated into the forecast in the future. And so that's where we see the increase in the capital-related costs because there will be some debt payments that are required. Next slide, please. And next slide. So with all this and working through the analysis, the recommended rate increases are 3% annually per year over the forecast period and 2% for wastewater. And so combined, when we look at water and wastewater, it's between 2.35 and 2.44% annually over the forecast period. And so the bills for next year or the rates for next year would look like $71.43 every 2 months for water. And then on top of that, the $2 per cubic meter for usage. And then for the wastewater, $130.93 every 2 months, and then $2.70 per cubic meter. Next slide, please. And I'll show you what that looks like on a typical bill in a moment. And so when we took a look at the water analysis, based on some of the discussion, we did have a couple scenarios we wanted to look at. And so the recommended rate scenario is 3% rate increases annually. What we're trying to target is a minimum balance of about $1 million in 2030. And this includes $600,000 internal loan in 2026. So basically next year, the water system gets $600,000 as an internal loan. And then we start to pay that back in 2031, finishing off by the end of the forecast period. And so that's how we came to the 3% rate increases. Sorry if we stay on that side. Then there's two alternative scenarios. So the first alternative scenario is, well, what happens if we don't take that $600,000 internal loan, but we try to get back to the same reserve fund balances? What happens is we need to increase the rates by 9% per year, 26, 27, 28, and then we can have 0% rate increases, and we'll kind of end up in the same spot. The other alternative scenario was, well, let's keep that $600,000 internal loan with payback. But what happens if we want to do 2% rate increases for the next 2 years? Then we would need a 6% rate increase in 2028, then 4%, 3%, and then we can do 2% increases thereafter. Next slide, please. And so really what I wanted to highlight here is the volatility in customer bills if we were looking at these alternative scenarios. And so what this represents is the annual change in bills. And so for just looking at the water side of things, under the recommended scenario, essentially the bill increases just over $20 per year. Okay, it's a relatively steady increase year over year and consistent. If we look at alternative scenario one, the dashed teal green line, you can see the bills change, by $60 in the first year, by $75, and then it drops down to essentially zero increase for the rest. When we're looking at alternative scenario two, we see the rate increases are about $15, and then they jump up to over $42, and then they come back down, and then they slowly come down. But what we wanted to highlight here, and again, part of what we're trying to do as part of this long-term analysis is try to smooth out those rate increases to make it more, just make it more consistent for the customers so they know what the change in bill is going to be and it doesn't fluctuate significantly from year to year if possible. Next slide, please. As we talked about the capital, we talked about funding of those capital needs and how we're identifying the need for some external debt financing, and how we identify that we need to transfer money into the bank account to save up to pay for these assets. And this is important because the province mandates that we can't spend more than 25% of our own revenues. And so you can think of this like a mortgage. If I'm going to get a mortgage, and I have my income from work, I can't spend more than 25% of my income on my mortgage payments. So similarly for debt payments, municipalities can't spend more of all of the money you take in from taxes, from water rates, from wastewater rates, et cetera. You can't spend more than 25% of that on debt payments. And so you currently have over $500,000 in debt payments for water and wastewater infrastructure. But what happens is when we look at all the debt that's required by the end of the forecast period, we would be over 20% of your own revenues. And that's represented by the teal bar there. If we look out even past 10 years, there's also going to be the need for this water plant expansion in the future, which is estimated right now at about $7 million, which kind of puts you pretty close to your provincial limit. So most municipalities set a lower threshold, about 15%. We generally recommend to stay about 20% so you can deal with some economic fluctuations. But you can see keeping the rates at 3% and 2%, we still have some need for issuance of debt that's going to starting to put you closer to your limit. And so that's where there's the need to save the money into the bank accounts where possible. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for a typical average residential customer? When we took a look at historical usage, the average residential customer is about 150 cubic meters per year. So based on that, the total bill in 2025 would be about $1,874.76. With the proposed rate increases next year, it would be $1,919.15, which is about $44.39, or about $3.70 more per month. Okay, and then you can see the forecasted increases there. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at the water and wastewater rates, a long-term plan, and being able to kind of forecast these 2%, 3% increases, which are typically just around inflation, I want to compare that to some of the recent studies that Watson has completed. And so just looking at recent studies that we've completed and looking at some of the rate increases that we on average see over that 10-year period, you see Cavan Monaghan down at the lower end there. We see a number of municipalities that are looking at 3% rate increases year over year, but there are a few that have some significant rate increases year over year that they're forecasting. And that's because things like asset management has now become more of an issue and more of a concern that are now built into the rates. But the township has actually been pretty good at incorporating this information in the past. That's why we're able to look at this kind of 2%, 3% increases over the forecast and not something more significant. Next slide, please. And so just kind of wrapping up with taking a look at a sample bill, and this is an older example from 2020, but the bill still looks the same. What's on the screen here is the total amount due in the top right. And then under this, the bar in the middle there, it says invoice description amount. It does identify, the address, the meter number, and it shows your current meter reading and the prior meter reading, which then the difference is how much water you've used. And so then it takes that amount of cubic meters, multiplies it by the rate to give you your sewer charge, adds on that fixed charge that comes up every 2 months, and does the same thing for the water bill. Takes your cubic meters, multiply it by the rate, and then adds on that fixed charge to come up with the total bill in this example of $286.89. Okay. Next slide, please. And let's skip to the last slide that is the chart, because I think that's that's the best one to go over. So with the rate study, so that was the water wastewater rate study, and we take your current information and we forecast the additional capital operating needs, the growth, and come up with those rates that we would require in every year. Then what we need to do is the province says we need to submit a water financial plan through Ontario Regulation 45307. And this water financial plan takes that rate study information, translates it into accounting, and makes it forward-looking financial statements. And so there's some slight differences between the rate study and the financial plan approach, but this financial plan is a requirement of obtaining your license for water. And so once we're completed with the rate study, council approves the proposed rates for next year and the forecast in general. Then what we can do is complete the financial plan, and that'll come back at a future council date where a resolution is required just to approve the financial plan, and then it can be submitted to the province. Okay, next slide, please. So with that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Daryl. I appreciate walking us through that and the explanations and the adjustments from the feedback that was provided at the previous meeting. So that's great. So as you may see from, I feel like I'm really loud. Is that? Yes, I can hear myself. Is that better? I think maybe. Yes. Trying. Thank you. Okay, I'll try that. Anyways, Daryl is I think he has another meeting that he has to get to, so he's not going to be staying for the report that's later on the agenda where we'll make the final decision. But if you have questions about the study, now's the time for Daryl, and then Wayne and Drew, et cetera, can fill in the rest later on. Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Through you, Chair. Ooh, loud too. It's good to do that.
Daryl.
There. I can turn the wheel. Still found loud though. Anyway, again, thank you, Daryl, for the presentation. I got one question, one comment. My question is in the growth. It looks like all the growth is going into the 15-18 millimeter. I'm assuming, like, are you taking into account the fact there is potentially a school coming online in the next, I don't know, I want to hesitate the number of years that'll come online. But I mean, I'm assuming that will come on monthly. It's 10 to 20 times what a residential building would be. I just wondering, is that, we just didn't want to plan for that, and we'll deal with it when it comes online. And my second comment is the percent increase graph that you had from the various municipalities is interesting, but I've yet to come across a resident that's, compared the percent increase from another municipality for their water bill. What they compare is what they were paying in a different municipality. So a much more useful graph there would be, what is the water and wastewater rate from, Trent Hills or Kawartha Lakes compared to what it is in Cape-Monaghan. The percent increase really doesn't, I can't talk to a citizen that our increase was less than anywhere else. Thank you.
Yeah, so through the mayor. So for the first question about the incorporating the school into the growth forecast. So what we typically do, just to be conservative on the forecast, is we only look at residential growth. And this is something that we do across municipalities, unless there's, significant change that is 100% certain coming online. Then what we do is we just focus on the residential growth because the denominator in the calculations is the cubic meters, that volume. And so we don't want to overestimate the volume, because if we overestimate the volume, your rates aren't going to be enough to recover the cost that you need. So that's in part why we didn't incorporate any forecast for the school. With respect to the rate increase graph, I completely understand, and I can maybe send over a graph or a summary through township staff, which summarizes the rate comparison. One of the reasons why we wanted to show this is that although the rates, again, might be maybe it's higher than Trent Hills, for example, now, if the rate increases that are forecast are higher, it won't be necessarily in a few years, right? And so this goes to show that the rate that we have now is stable, and that we can increase the rates basically with inflation now, because we've incorporated all of the correct components. And the challenge with comparing to other municipalities as well is different systems have different requirements for infrastructure. And at the end of the day, municipalities need to plan for their asset management requirements and ensure full cost recovery. So, understandably, maybe the rates vary from one municipality to another, but there's geography, there's elevation that will change the requirements of the infrastructure, et cetera. So all of those things come into play, which is why municipalities have different rates.
Thanks for that, Daryl. Just maybe a question that relates to the same sort of content as the deputy mayor's question. So assuming, I think I understand now about forecasting only for the residential growth, but when we're talking about more density in the way of, potentially apartment buildings and complexes of that regard, are those captured in the forecast as the same sort of residential piping, despite the fact that they may be on a larger scale and a larger, obviously for the facility themselves, but then that's subdivided and considered in those 15 millimeter, 18 millimeter units? Is that how that's captured?
Yeah, so if we scroll back to that slide, I think it's slide 8. Oh, perfect. So that new growth line, what we've forecasted is actually, so with all of the anticipated single detached units, semi-detached units, and townhouse units, because essentially one unit is one customer. When we get into things like apartment buildings, it's a little bit trickier because depending on the apartment building, the whole building is typically one customer, which might be a higher meter size. And so what we do for the apartments is we actually, let's say we're going to forecast, let's say 100 apartment units. We might say, well, that's 2 apartment buildings. And then we basically say that's 2 new customers at the kind of lower customer rate, again, to be conservative, because the challenge with apartment buildings is the timing of those, and then as well, like the completion of those within the forecast period. So again, we don't want to overestimate the volumes, so we just kind of assume that the one apartment building is one customer for the purposes of the calculations.
No, and I can appreciate wanting to be conservative. I think the reason behind some of our questions is just like trying to get an understanding of how conservative, like understanding, with the planning horizon that we're meeting, with regards to the commercial expansions, 5 years is probably, we'll be in the later stages when we accumulate those sorts of customers, if not, right, sort of that time frame. So hopefully those will be reflected on a more, kind of actual basis, I'm going to say, for the next study, but it's good to just kind of understand where we're at, because it is probable, I would suggest, that at least one of those apartment units will be close to construction or close to that sort of timeline. Hopefully, I mean, what remains to be seen what happens with the market. So thanks for that. Other questions, members of council? Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair to Daryl, on that subject, in the real world, have you got any exposure or reality numbers that if say there's 100 residents in a high rise compared to 100 residents in single family dwellings, I'm going to guess that the usage when you're not paying the water bill individually tends to exceed what the normal family would try to do in conservation or moderating their bills. Would you have any numbers to throw at me that would tell me one way or the other if that's true?
Yeah, so through the mayor, I don't have any specific figures to validate that. I would say that, when we're planning for when municipalities are planning for infrastructure, they tend to assume kind of the same usage per capita, so per person. But I guess it would really depend on if those apartment units were owned by those residents or rented, because effectively they're paying for their water usage, and they do have an incentive to use a bit less water if they're paying for the bill. But unfortunately, sorry, I don't have any specific numbers for that.
Thanks, Daryl. Follow-up question, Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, back to Daryl. Last month I asked, when those rate increase chart was laid out, how many of those residents in those different communities that you did studies in the past, you were going to look into how many were actually on the water system and how were just populations of those communities? Have you had a chance to look at that at all, please?
Yeah, I can send that through to staff, so that by the time you get to the report, that you can have that list.
Thanks for that, Daryl. Other questions, members of council? Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Chase. More of a comment again, and a follow-up to that rate increase chart. Like I think I understand it more now that you've explained it as kind of, to show stability, which is a good thing. I guess it almost to expand it, I would say, to show the stability of this municipality, versus, municipalities that are going to be facing, steep increases that are going to stay up there, right? Because if you look at our three options, I mean, we did have kind of that, almost a flat line, like a slow increase on that 3%, basically, right? But the other two options were big spikes and drops, right? So any of those other townships, like the ones that were a 9 or 10% increase, could very well have done, a spike and then a drop, right? So again, like the comparison is a single point in time comparison, and I don't think it's telling the real story. Like I think, the story that we have to tell is that we've kind of got our arms around this thing, and we've got it, down to a stable area where we're not going to experience these crazy spikes, or we're not going to have to do massive increases to catch up, which I think is the real story that we want to get out there and tell people. And I guess this is the chart that does it, but I'm just struggling with that comparison chart, because it's inevitable that when you talk to somebody, they're going to compare to, they came from Clarington and paid less, or they came from Bowmanville and they paid less. And you're like, and as you said, I mean, all the factors, the geography, the population, the infrastructure, like it's all part and parcel of, what makes up the rate. But then, this consistency that we've been able to achieve, is our good news story. And it would be nice to be able to package that a little bit better. Maybe I've got to work that through my own mind versus your role, but just a comment on that rate increase chart.
Yeah, it would be nice to have even, understanding the nuances, as Deputy Mayor mentioned, with the systems when they've been installed, what's been done and works right in the past. It would be great to have at least a couple of, maybe not 1,000 users on the system, but somewhere in the ballpark to give us an understanding, because I think that's one of the, the common misunderstandings is when they're coming from an area where there's 10,000, 20,000 users. Well, that's a lot of fixed revenue that we don't have the option of. And it's also been, I've had to remind a few residents that we have to pull our water from the ground, not take it from a lake. And there's a lot of implications of that sort of ground source water as well, and costs associated with it. So anyways, lots to discuss. So we'll look forward to getting that information in the time frame, and then we'll share it with council at the consideration of the report. Any other questions for Daryl before we move on? We do have another delegate here today, so I want to get their presentation underway, but seeing none. So we're just receiving the presentation for information. Can I get a mover and a seconder for that? Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, seconded by Councillor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Daryl, thank you for making the time for us today, and thanks for all your work on this. And I'm sure we'll see you soon. Take care.
Thank you very much.
All right, moving on to our next delegation, 7.1, Miss Nancy Hurley from the Managing Director of the Old Millbrook School Early On Child and Family Center.
Hey, good morning, Mayor and Council. Thank you for having me today. My name is Nancy Hurley, and I am the Managing Director of the Old Millbrook School Early On Child and Family Center, and it's located out of the Old Millbrook School. So for those of you who are not familiar with our programs, we offer free play-based programs for families in our community here and beyond, for families that have children mainly ages birth until 6 years of age, although we do not turn other children away when they come in. So this is a provincially funded program. It's funded through the Ministry of Education. It is flowed through a socialist transfer fund from the federal government. And these programs have been around for over 25 years. So they have a longevity. It has been funded by the province for that long. So the idea of our programs is to kind of give every family, regardless of their background, their socioeconomic situation, even footing for entry into kindergarten. So we support early learning and development. We engage parents and children together. We know that play is how children learn, and based on our own experience as children, we have a kind of moving kind of range of what we have capacity to do with our own children. And then we also really focus on making connections for other families in our community. We have a lot of families that have come in and made friends in the community, been better connected and deeply rooted to the community, which is wonderful. We know for a fact that when families feel very deeply rooted and engaged in their community, they are far more likely to stay in that community for longer. Next slide, please. So I just want to share with you some data from this specific year, just to give you an idea of how our programs are being used. So on the slide, what you're seeing is unique visits for adults and children, and then number of visits. So a unique visit would indicate one child attending. Okay, so that child, number one, however many times they come would be the total number of visits, but the unique visits are. So we've seen 640 children only this year alone at our program, 489 adults, for a total of 4,495 visits to our program by children and over 3,500 visits by adults. So you can see the programs are very, very well utilized. So next slide, please. You can see some photos here of families that play. These are in our programs. These are not stock photos. We have a lot of families that use our program, like I said, all the time. And what we are seeing more and more, which partly why I'm here today, is families who are coming in who are having to make a choice to have one parent stay home because of the lack of childcare spaces. I know you probably hear this a lot, but there is a childcare crisis across Canada. It is not unique to Ontario. And I wanted to come today and make a request that can hopefully be a bit of a creative way to open up possible spaces for children. Next slide. So right now we offer programs in 2 locations, one at the old school, one in Keene. Now I think I should have mentioned this earlier. For those of you who are not familiar, we are not a specific childcare program. Parents come with their children or caregivers or grandparents and they stay. However, we work very, very closely with all of our community partners, including the childcare operators within the township. Next slide. So we are actually here. I'm here today on behalf of our program as well as Compass Early Learning and Care. And I apologize, the slide is an error. It's not a 40 by 40-foot building I'm requesting. That was my typo. I've been fighting a cold and there is a bit of a miscommunication. We are here to request space on the property for a 10 by 10 structure with an overhang that would lengthen the structure to 16 feet. Okay. And it would be a very purpose-built shed on our property. And it's just to support increased outdoor engagement as well as possibly allow the childcare operators in our community to offer more nature-based childcare programs. And that is something that is taking off across the country. However, we need shelter spaces in these programs for inclement weather. Next slide. So we would be using it for storage and accessibility, a weather shelter, like I mentioned. All outdoor childcare programs operate all day long in any kind of weather. However, we do have to account for things like ice storms and thunder and things like that. That's why we're asking for the shelter to have an overhang that would allow children to come still be outside, but have a little shelter from the weather. And then we'd also love this build because anything we can put in a centralized outdoor space to allow for more learning. We don't believe that children's learning takes a lot of props and toys. You can do a lot with a little, but we do need specific equipment that would offer us to extend play and enhance play for children and their educators together. And it would also allow us to, I think, build a lot more awareness and increase the usage of the outdoor spaces in our township as well. Next slide. So we have some community partners who are interested in having a further conversation about donating time and materials, and that's something that we would talk about further based on the needs of the township as well and your insurance needs and things like that. But we're asking you today for space, nothing more. I'm not here to ask you to incorporate this shed build into your fiscal budget. I just need you to consider, please, offering us some land. And as the person who, other than the library, is in this building and on this property the most, we have the space. It can honestly go right beside the shed that we currently have and are using right now. So we're very, very flexible. And we do, because of the fact that it's not overly big, we do think it is feasible to put it on the land of the old school at the moment. Next slide, please. So I'm sure some of you know me and I'm not one to mince words. I'm asking you to approve this sooner rather than later, if possible, please, because the fact that we do have all of these partners and businesses who are willing to participate in making this build happen, the sooner we get permission for the land, the sooner we can move forward. Ideally and realistically speaking, with the colder weather coming and the fact that certain things cannot be done during the winter months, we would anticipate that the timeline around this be a build starting in early spring in order for them to use the space in the spring and summer and moving onwards into 2026. Next slide. So like I said, the only piece we're missing right now is a suitable location. We're open to the location. I want to be clear about that. Ideally, we do want it on that property. But where on that property, we're open. We don't really have any specific spot that we're really deeply rooted into. And I'm happy to walk around with staff as well to figure out where this could possibly go. Next slide. This is a rough idea of what it would look like. So it's pretty basic, as you can see, and the height would allow adults to safely shelter underneath it as well. Next slide. Next slide. And that's it, short and sweet. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you.
Thanks, Nancy. That's a great presentation. Nice to see you, and thanks for all the hard work you and everyone at the Early On Center does. We can see by the numbers, it's a very well utilized program and a very, important contribution to taking care of the kids in our community. So thanks for all that hard work. This is fairly straightforward, gentlemen. We're just directing staff to work with Nancy and her team to coordinate the location. If there's any questions, we can do that, but I think it's fairly straightforward, and I think it would be a great thing for staff to work as quickly as possible to, it'd probably be Chris and Yvette and probably some other staff if you need it as well. So let's just keep it generic at staff. Did anyone have questions for Nancy? Sorry, before I cut off, Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair. So I'm guessing this is just going to be built on grade. It would be somewhat mobile if it needed to be. My own big concern, and I'm sure you are too, is that it's put somewhere where the visibility is high, so damage is low when the school is not operating.
Great question. And yes, I think that the areas we've been looking at are areas that are already well utilized. And I can speak to the shade structure that you approved a couple of years ago. We did have a bit of a discussion around that as well. Anytime we're thinking about putting stuff on township property, utilizing the land, other people's resources, things like that, we want to make sure that these things aren't damaged. I can say, and I think Chris could support me on this, we haven't had any damage to the shade structure. So I think ultimately when we are adding things to our community and we're adding them in a way that does not gatekeep who is using it. So like the overhang of that structure, anyone can use at any time. So when we're talking about damage, oftentimes we're talking about, people who may be of a certain age and be bored. But I think the more we are offering, the less actually we see of that, because the more we are putting into our community, the more our members of all ages feel like they are being seen and we've talked about this. We have, for example, the Compass Early Learning Care. They offer school age programming as well. So it's a great opportunity to get those school age children in care who will eventually be the tweens and teens coming into our parks on their own with more independence. For them, when they're connected to the builds of these to these structures and connected to what we're doing in our community, they, like anybody else, becomes far more invested. And I think that's where we see the decrease in potential damages.
Absolutely, that makes sense. Other questions, Deputy Mayor?
Through you, Chair. Thank you, Nancy, for all the work you do. It is fantastic and doesn't go unrecognized. And I was actually kind of excited at the 40 by 40 structure. That would be kind of neat how we figured out to put that in there. But I guess, 10 by 10 is actually kind of small. So I'm just wondering whether there's flexibility in whatever we put in there to, maybe just right size it depending on where we find, we have to go, and leave it to Chris and staff to figure out what the proper spot is. And obviously whoever's donating materials to you is another big factor to that. But yeah, I would, hesitate on, restricting it to the 10 by 10 if, 12 by 12 or 16 by 16 happens to be a little bit more appropriate for wherever it lands. It's my only comment on that.
Through the mayor. So we're open, and I think you're right. I think it has to do a lot with one, the building supplies that are available, but two, we're understanding that we're coming to you asking for more land to be utilized. I think we were trying to keep it relatively realistic, but yes, I would be open to that. I will say that when Chris and I originally kind of had a look at the land for the shade structure, there is actually not a ton of land that is level enough that we wouldn't then need to look into re-leveling, resurfacing, possibly building a bigger, like a more kind of complex kind of structure, like foundation that it sits on. So that would be one factor we would have to consider for sure.
Okay, good discussion. Thanks for coming again, Nancy. We have two recommendations: just to receive the delegation, but then also direct staff to work with Ms. Hurley for a suitable location for the shed in question. Can I get a mover? Moved by Deputy Mayor, seconded by Councilor Edgerton. All in favor? That is approved. Thanks, Nancy. Thanks so much for coming. We have a few sets of minutes. We're going to, the first sets of minutes are with regards to the regular meeting held October 20th. We're approving those as presented. Moved by Counselor Burns, seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? Those are approved. Next is the Cavan Monaghan Public Library Board minutes of September 9th. We're just receiving those for information. Can I get a mover and a seconder? Moved by Counselor Burns, second by Counselor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. Next, we are into the reports section of the meeting, and up first is Ms. Pope with the water wastewater rate study user fee changes bylaw.
Thank you, Mayor. Through you to council, we have before you the water wastewater rate study. This is built on the presentations that you've seen from Watson Associates. It has Schedule A attached, which provides the detailed changes to the rates. And in addition to that, the actual bylaw to place in the user fees rates to start on the 1st of January of 2026 for the 5-year period as outlined in the study and in this presentation. As noted, there was a recommendation in the study and also in this report. There were 2 alternative scenarios that were provided that you could take a look at, but staff are recommending that we go ahead with the recommendation from the report, which did have a 3% annual increase for water and a 2% annual increase for wastewater, with the motion from council from October 20th for the $600,000 loan, then to start repayment in the next iteration of the 5-year study. So I have before you the bylaw and schedules for discussion and approval today.
Thank you, Ms. Pope. So questions with regards to the report, members of council? Who would like to go first? Counselor Burns.
Through the chair to Kimberly, on page 119 of the report, it talks about gross wages and the increase between this calendar year and next calendar year. And the jump, and are we hiring more people for water management?
Thank you. Actually, if you recall, we took the water wastewater components in-house. We're no longer exporting that to an external company. And so because of that, it was only a portion of the current year that we had wages for our municipal staff and a portion for the contract. So what you're seeing for 2026 is the contract removed in full, because there now is no longer a contract, and the wages. So it's not necessarily an increase. And when I can have the Public Works Director speak to this, but there are 2 particular operators that are dedicated 100% within this through the water wastewater operating budget. But I can allow the Public Works Director to speak to that.
Mr. Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Councillor Byrne. First of all, as Director of Finance has mentioned, we did take over the operation in-house as of April 1st. We have 2 full-time operators on staff, and we have our water wastewater technician that are allowed for in this budget. And we have partial amounts of our asset management director, et cetera, also as part of it, but there is no increase in staff proposed in this budget line. It's just an annualization.
Thank you, Mr. Hancock and Ms. Pope. Other questions, members of council? Counselor Burns.
Through the chair back to Kimberly, just for my clarification, so page 119 and page 123 on the expense part of they almost mimic each other for the exact same numbers, yet they're separated by water and wastewater. Is that just an overlap of the 2?
Thank you. Through the mayor to council. That's actually in water and wastewater, it's split 50-50 unless there's a designated portion that's specifically for water or specifically for wastewater. When it's administration salaries that are between the 2, you'll see an automatic 50-50 split. So it depends on the particular subject matter, but our salaries, yes, they are split 50-50 between water and wastewater.
Follow up.
Through the chair. So the other thing I wasn't sure of, so the executive side of who's looking after water, so Yvette Hurley is number 1 on the water and Wayne Hancock would be the second. Are their wages, their yearly salaries, are some of that funded by wastewater, or is this strictly for people below that?
Spoke.
Thank you. I'm just going to pull this up here. Just give me a second. So we have two executive positions that have a small allocation of 20% over to the water wastewater, sorry. Yes, sorry, over to the water wastewater. And then the other three positions are 100% water wastewater. So we have our asset management position and our director of public works that have a 20% allocation there. However, the two positions that the public works director has mentioned, they're 100% over there. And then we also have our new water wastewater, sorry, I don't know Clinton's title, technician, thank you, is also there.
Thanks, Ms. Pope. Other questions, members of council? Seeing none. So there's a number of, if I just scroll back up to the top, there's a number of recommendations in the report before us today. Sorry, I'll get there eventually. There they are. So there are four recommendations. Recommendation number one, that we received the 2025 water wastewater rate study as presented, that count, and then number two, that council approves the recommended rate scenarios for the 2025 water and wastewater rate study of 3% annually for the water and 2% annually for the wastewater, with a $600,000 internal loan in 2026 repaid for from the 2031 to 2035 to set the consolidation rates. And that count number three is that council approves bylaw number 2025-50 being a bylaw to impose and consolidate water and wastewater user fees and changes. And number four is that council approves the use of the water and wastewater rate study in the preparation of the water and wastewater financial plan OREG 453-07 for the submission to the province. So that's just the administrative portion and the requirement. Any questions about any of those recommendations beforehand? Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Chair, on the second recommendation about the $600,000 internal loan, should we be specific on the interest being charged in that?
I believe, Ms. Pope, would you like to speak to that? Because I believe the intention or what the discussion was from the previous meeting was that there was no interest being accumulated over the initial 5 years, but then there would be once the payback was commencing. But you can correct me if I'm wrong, Ms. Pope.
Thank you. Just for clarification, we don't have a repayment in the 5 years in this study. It is for year one at the beginning of the next study. One of the things we did verbally speak to, but it's not written in stone and wasn't part of the motion, but that we had the Bank of Canada rate for any external loan regarding DCs, and we had the indexing of 1.9% for our internal loans, and that we would mimic that internal loan CPI type indexing, whatever existed at that time. The understanding was about 1.9% is where we're at today. We'll see where we're at then and bring it forward to council at that time. But that was the general, we weren't thinking of going Bank of Canada rate. We were thinking of keeping it in like an internal loan. And may I, while I'm speaking, sorry, Daryl has provided an update on those two charts. And so if that's permissible and council would like to see them, they are available.
I think we would just need a motion to council for adding those documents. So can I get a mover and a seconder to add those materials for council's consideration? Moved by Councillor Nanchoff, seconded by Councillor Byrne. All in favor? That is approved. Okay, really share away, please. Oh, take just a minute. Any other questions while we're Councillor Byrne?
Through the chair, not really a question, more of a comment. I feel like my hands are kind of tied as a councillor because of the Ontario regulations that have been brought in since Walkerton, because you don't want to do anything that might be presumed as negative to Safe Drinking Water Act and a few other rules. But I just like to emphasize how expensive the expansion of this township with mass development and the infrastructure that's going to come with it. We can talk all day long about comparing other areas and other costs and other raises in the cost of running water systems, but overall it's just very expensive. And I know we all realize that, but I think it needs to be emphasized that a lot of the residents here in the community are struggling now, let alone with these other increases going forward.
Yeah, but just to that point as well, I mean, the water rates are a requirement, and you know, those individuals that are on the system don't really have an alternative. And I think what you can see from the grads that are provided with a lot of the works, unfortunately, what we're confronted with from a fiscal picture is the fact that there were no financial obligations prior to the Walkerton disaster. So there was no savings, there was no cost of replacement, there was no asset management for the water system now. that we had for 50 years. And so it was nice for those residents who enjoyed the benefit of very low water rates for that time. Unfortunately, those are being subsidized at the cost of the future people that we're going to have to fix the existing infrastructure that's in the village. So, you know, I can empathize as we're all facing fiscal pressures as we do every year with the budget, but it kind of shows why this sort of asset management requirements came into place. Because individuals and municipalities weren't saving for the replacing and costs associated with the infrastructure that higher levels of government installed on their behalf for them for free and then handed them the keys. So I can understand that it wasn't a requirement, but just as any personal financial matter is, you're going to have to save for the future costs of the systems and the infrastructure that you have. And in the absence of that being done, those costs just come to roost later on to the existing ratepayers and it's just a legislation that's requiring us to enforce them and requiring us to enshrine them in a fiscal plan. But the reality is there was no savings set aside for the system that we had for 40 years. And in 2010, I believe there was less than $200,000 set aside for cost of replacement infrastructure. And you had 18 to $20 million worth of infrastructure that was nearing 50 years old. So that's, you know, that's sort of the pain of picture that we're at. And I do emphasize for those individuals that are dealing with that. And we've also had, unfortunately, the delay and disruptions with the growth that we've been planning on, and that the DCs and the funding picture were painted and established back in 2015 when we entered into those OI debentures. So it's a bit of a rock and a hard place, but I do think, you know, unfortunately, we can't go back and we can't get any of the monies back that could have been allocated towards the cost of replacing that old infrastructure. But, you know, I think it's a good indication that all of the users on the system are in this together from a fiscal standpoint. Hopefully with the addition of more density, the cost of the infrastructure will be much less than they are now for those new ratepayers, and the whole system will hopefully buffer out. So we'll see what happens. Councillor Byrne.
Through the chair on that note, and I know very little about what happened at Walkerton, but I didn't think the little bit I did hear that it was so much money related. It's just poor management and neglect. It wasn't really a deprivation of resources. It was just poor management, but I may have that wrong.
Well, we are here. So do we need to take a brief recess to share this information, do we think, or was that interlude sufficient?
Yes.
It's okay. We're just going to take a brief recess so we can get that information up online for the meeting. So we'll take, kind of going to move in a second for a brief recess. Moved by Councillor Byrne, second by Councillor Natchoff, all in favor. That is approved. We'll be back in a number of minutes. Okay, we've figured out our technical components here, so we'll reconvene today's meeting. Ms. Page, I believe yourself and staff are going to share what's been shared with us. Okay, so you can just zoom in on that a little bit for us here. Ms. Pope, do you want to try to speak to this? I mean, I know you've just been handed it, but it shows a bit of the columns that talk about the number of users and the number of rate increases. I don't think it's shown us, the only thing to Deputy Mayor's comments is it doesn't show us what the year over year or forecasted increases are for the various municipalities listed. So, you know, at the Deputy Mayor's point, they may have chosen options where those higher increases are a one time and then it's going to buffer out or be a significant decrease after. But it would be interesting to maybe, if it's at all possible, maybe to have Daryl provide what the 5-year forecast is for each of those municipalities. And this is great because it does give us a much more pertinent list, but it would be nice to understand in a context of the 5-year horizon that they're all planning on, what it means in guise of that. Is it 9% year over year, or have they chosen a similar option to one of the other ones in the report to do 9% and then 0 for the foreseeable future? So that would be my only ask. But I mean, I feel bad putting questions through the chart we just got to Kimberly, but if anyone has any questions, we can try to get through it together with regards to the chart. But can you also share that with members of council as well, just so we have it, just in case maybe we can ask questions and review it further in our own. Perfect. We'll go to Councillor Natchoff and then Deputy Mayor Huntley.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I know that it was mentioned as well before. If we can include the communities in like the eastern part of Durham, where like a lot of the population of the people are moving from, so we can kind of do a comparable from people moving from there to here, just so we have a better number or more accurate kind of read.
Well, we also talked about trying to have an actual bill, so we know like the percent increase is one thing, but what onto what? Like what 9% onto what, right? So I think there's always more context that we're looking for in this subject, but it's sometimes the easiest thing to do is just ask people that you know to share a water bill in confidence with the community and then get an understanding. I know I've done that when I saw that orange bill. I know I've asked friends of mine to email me a copies of their bills so I can take a look. Any other questions? Ms. Pope, you want to speak to it?
Sure, we can definitely take your comments back. We'll then take a look at Durham or other local areas. We'll look at the 5-year rates, and you also want to see dollar value, not just percentage. And then once we receive that information back, I can email that out to all of council, and we'll have that actual bill comparison. So whatever he can provide. The one caveat I do want to say is with Watson, they're providing us those that they have also done the rate studies for, and that's the information that's readily available to them. I'm not certain about the ones where they haven't done the studies for. There might be a few gaps, but we will give you what he can provide.
Thanks, Ms. Pope. So sorry, Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Chair. I do like these graphs because I mean, the one that jumps out to me right now is, you know, the city of Kawartha Lakes is, you know, better than 10 times our size, yet their water bill is only marginally less than ours. So that the whole concept of, you know, the economy of scale and having a much bigger population, you know, lowers your water bill. Or in a situation like this, and I don't know the situation in the city of Kawartha Lakes by any stretch, but just by pure numbers, you know, if they have 10 times the population on their system, you think they'd have a much more significant difference in that water bill, and it's just not there. So there is information in this, and I think it's useful. So thank you to Daryl for getting us this information. So it does help us look like we are sort of in line, considering we are one of the lower populations on that chart, even though we are a little bit higher than most, but we're not disproportionately higher than most. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think Deputy Mayor and I can speak to as well. Like we've had conversations. I think a lot of municipalities in the rural, especially in Eastern Ontario, are talking more about these modular systems. But when we've had delegations at County Council about these modular systems, they're suggesting that it's feasible based on those systems for smaller developments for a $300 a month water wastewater bill, whereas we're, you know, far cry from that, and we're on bi-monthly cycles as well. So that the market seems to think that that's cost effective, which obviously I think a lot of people, and especially in our community, would hazard against that. But anyways, that's enough fodder for conversation today. So there are 4 recommendations. I won't read them again. They're all sort of interrelated. Can I get a mover and a seconder for those 4 recommendations? No, we haven't done the mover yet. I just read them last time, so we're kind of out of sync. Moved by Councillor Natchoff, seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley, all in favor? That is approved. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kimberly, for those questions, and thank you, Daryl and Cindy and Mark for getting that up for us to review. Next on the agenda is 10.2, Report Building and Planning 2025-39 Development Statistics. Mr. Phillips.
Oh, it just wasn't turned on. Thank you, Mayor. Through you to the rest of council, the recommendation for the report before you is that council receive Building Department Report 2025-39 Development Statistics, third quarter 2025 for information. Just briefly, quarter three has been down slightly. We're trending slightly under forecasted, but quarter four so far has been up. One other change we've made to this is we've just removed the county and education portion of the development charges, just so the chart is more focused on township DCs. And that's all.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Questions, members of council? Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair to Kyle, just from my own personal knowledge, when the new single-family dwelling has ticked upwards, does a townhouse count or does a group of townhouses count as a single dwelling?
Through you, Mayor, to Councilor Byrne, a townhouse, each individual one counts as a single family dwelling. So if we have a group of five, it's 5 single family dwellings.
Oh,
Yes, through the chairs, back to that point. So 29 single-family dwellings, that's township wide. And I'm just wondering how that fares out as far as how it's dispersed across the area of the township.
Through you, Mayor, to Councilor Byrne, that is township wide. In quarter three, the majority was in Tower Hill North, but there are somewhere in the range of 3 to 4 that were in some of our smaller residential new subdivisions in Ida and Mount Pleasant, 2 or 3, I think.
Deputy Mayor.
Through you, Chair. Great job on the charts, Mr. Phillips. Much appreciated. My question is, you're about 71% of the way to your target for the budget. Do you expect you'll be able to make it in that fourth quarter, or you think things are trailing off for it?
Through you, Mayor, to Deputy Mayor Huntley. So what I was saying previously was quarter four has started up slightly, but November and as soon as the snow starts to fly, things tend to slow down a bit. But we've had busy Decembers, busy Novembers before. I think probably right now we're somewhere around 80% around there. So probably will end up, I'm guessing, slightly under, but not too much for how this year's been. It's been a little busier here than it has been elsewhere, so we've been thankful for that.
Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Other questions? Seeing none, the recommendation is that we're just receiving this report for information. Can I get a mover and a second to that? Moved by Councilor Byrne, seconded by Councilor Edgerton. All in favor? That is approved. Next item is report 10.3, Public Works Unassumed Subdivision Road Winter Maintenance Agreement, Springville Heights. Wayne and Drew, I'm not sure who's taking the lead there, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to council, before you, we have Public Works Report 2025-17 with recommendations for the Unassumed Subdivision Road Winter Maintenance Agreement 2025 for the Springville Heights subdivision. The recommendations are as follows. Recommendation 1 is that council support the agreement between the Township of Kavimonaghan and Woodview Properties to complete road winter maintenance services as outlined in the attached Unassumed Subdivision Road Winter Maintenance Agreement 2025 on the plan of subdivision 45M-264. Recommendation 2 is that council authorize the clerk and CIO to sign the Unassumed Subdivision Road Winter Maintenance Agreement bylaw number 2025-49. And recommendation 3 is that council direct the CAO and senior staff to do an annual review of the Unassumed Subdivision Road Winter Maintenance Agreement for the Springville Heights subdivision and make administrative changes until the subdivision is fully assumed by the township. Just to note, recently we did bring an agreement for the Tower Hill North subdivision for winter maintenance. So these are identical agreements for the two subdivisions. Thanks.
Thanks, Drew. So this is just like you said, just offering the same service to a different subdivision that happens to be in Springville instead of that. And will be the same, sort of the fiscal commitment is going to be revisited annually, similar as the same agreement that we have with Tower Hill North. Okay, thank you for that. Questions, Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair to Drew. So this year's agreement for the Springville Hill Harley Cathcart's old property, does it differ much from last year when we looked after the same subdivision?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Byrne. So in this agreement, we will be plowing all the roads in the Springville subdivision. There are the 3 roads there. I believe last year, because when the road connection of Ashley Crescent, the bulb was taken out to continue the road. So I believe last year we just plowed that road and then back onto Sharp Line. We will be plowing all of them this year.
Thanks, Drew. So there are 3 recommendations with regards to this report. Seeing no other questions, they are as follows. The council support the agreement between the Township of Capmonaghan and Woodview Properties, Inc. to complete the road winter maintenance services as outlined in the attached unassumed subdivision road winter maintenance agreement 2025 on the plan of subdivision 45M-264, and the council authorize the clerk and the CAO to sign the unassumed subdivision road winter maintenance agreement bylaw number 2025-49, and the council direct the CAO and senior staff to do an annual review of the unassigned subdivision road winter maintenance agreement for the Springville Heights subdivision to make administrative changes until the subdivision is fully assumed by the township. And again, a mover and a seconder for those 3 recommendations. Moved by Councilor Byrne, seconded by Councilor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved.
Thank you through you, Chair. I actually have 2. So the first one, the GRCA, the discussions, we had a really great presentation on the incorporation of AI and the technologies across all of the different conservation authorities across Ontario to do just incredible mapping work and that kind of stuff. So that was super interesting. I can provide more information as that kind of gets rolled out. It'll happen more in the new year. In addition, we got the first preliminary budget for 2026. So the vote will be at our next meeting to approve that budget. And then the Millbrook Valley Trails, we had a really great presentation by the county, and kudos Chris and the Parks and Rec staff on the mapping, the GIS mapping that will be integrated through the county website, and then inevitably will be incorporated with a mobile app so that visitors using the trails will be able to log on and get far more in the moment information about the trails, elevation, distances, and yeah, so it was great on that end of things. So kudos to Chris and his team and working with the county. This has been in the works for quite a while. So in addition, they will be presenting a delegation to approve the budget for the Millbrook Valley Trails. Yeah, that was it. Thanks.
Thanks, Councilor Natchoff. And I assume based on this recent provincial announcement about the consolidation of some of these conservation authorities, there's going to be a lot to talk about in the new year while we're figuring out exactly what the implications of those changes are. Councilor Byrne.
Through the chair, I was just going to mention the look of the crosswalk for Remembrance Day downtown Millbrook being completed, and thank the Legion for the invite for the upcoming event for November 11th. Thank you.
Yeah, it looks great, and thanks to staff for making sure that was in place before obviously the celebrations next week. It's excellent. I had a couple just quick ones. One with regards to the police board. I just wanted to thank a few of our officers in the community. There was a few instances that were brought to my attention with regards to some unsafe areas in Cavan. And I know the officers have been and spoken with a number of parents that were witnesses to some of these events and have adjusted their enforcement strategy. So I just wanted to thank them for addressing those issues and listening to the concerns of the community in that regard. In addition, I wasn't able to attend the library board meeting, so I will get some more updates as when I attend the next one. And then in addition to that, I again wanted to mention there's a number of ceremonies going on next week, obviously, but ours is at the Cenotaph. I would suggest to be there around 10:30 beforehand, because it does come together quickly, and you don't want to be in the way of the parade as well. So get there to the Cenotaph. We'll look forward to seeing you there on Tuesday at 10:30 in the morning for an annual Remembrance Day service. Look forward to that. Can I get a mover and a seconder for those verbal reports? Moved by Councilor Burns, seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. There is no general business. There is no correspondence for information. Correspondence for action, Roma Conference Delegation Request. Ms. Hurley, would you like to speak to that?
Through you, Chair to Council. Yes, it is the annual request to see if Council is interested in moving forward with a delegation request to any of the ministers for the upcoming conference. I believe the mayor and I did speak about a couple, one being Minister of Education, the other one was Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing, and I believe I'm missing one, infrastructure. Thank you, Madam Clerk. Yes, the other one was the Minister of Infrastructure. And if council is supportive of that, then we would make our request. There's no guarantee that you get a meeting. We certainly fill out the documentation and see if we get selected. But I think those are the three that we had on our list. Mayor Graham?
Yep, those are the three on my list, but if anyone else would like to, for us to pursue a delegation, then by all means, we can add those to the list. Like again, we haven't been the most successful with getting the delegation, but when we aren't, usually our MPP is helpful with trying to facilitate some sort of less formal conversation while we're at the event. Councilor Byrne?
Through the chair, clarity for me, please. If you do have delegations at this conference or any other conference, does every rep that goes to that get included in that, or is it just the high level reps like the mayor or whatever that would get into that?
Oh, by all means, when we just haven't been successful with getting them, but when we do, we request that anyone who's attending the conference be there as well to help the advocacy and represent the entirety of the township. So that's the intention for sure. Exactly right. Okay, with that, can we get a mover and a seconder with regards to those delegation requests? Moved by Councilor Natchoff, second by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? That is approved. Bylaws. Just want to make sure. Yes. Okay, perfect. Sorry about that. That bylaw number 2025-49 being a bylaw to execute the unassumed subdivision road winter maintenance agreement between the Township of Cab Monaghan and Woodview Properties, Inc. for winter maintenance services of an unassumed subdivision roads within the Springville Heights subdivision, and bylaw number 2025-50 being a bylaw to impose water, wastewater user fees and charges to be read a first, second, third time and passed this third day of November, signed by the mayor and the clerk in the corporate seal attached. Can I get a mover for those bylaws? Moved by Councilor Burns, seconded by Deputy Mayor Huntley. All in favor? Those are approved. There is no unfinished business. There is no notices of motion. Confirming bylaw, that bylaw number 2025-51 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the meeting held November 3rd, 2025. Be read a first, second, third time and passed this third day of November, signed by the mayor and the clerk and the corporate seal attached there too. Can I get a mover for the confirming bylaw? Moved by Councilor Natchoff, second by Councilor Byrne. All in favor? That is approved. Lastly, motion to adjourn today's meeting. Moved by Deputy Mayor Huntley, seconded by Councilor Natchoff. All in favor? That is approved. In addition to the November 11th celebration that we've already mentioned, there are a number of upcoming events, and I will read the list. The next regular council meeting is Monday, November 17th at 1 p.m. The subsequent Cavan Monaghan Public Library Board meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, November 18th at 7 p.m. November Valley Trails Advisory meeting is Monday, November 24th at 4 p.m. The next regular council meeting subsequent to that is Monday, December 1st at 1 p.m. Then we have our special budget meeting, the first of the tradition, on Thursday, December 11th at 9 a.m. And then we also have the Santa Claus Parade scheduled for December 13th at 1 p.m., followed by our second and last council meeting of the 2025 calendar year on December 15th at 1 p.m. Thanks very much. We look forward to seeing everyone down at the Cenotaph next week. And I also wanted to just say a quick thanks to Millbrook South Cavan School. It was a great time to come down and talk to grade 4s and 5s last week about local government. Lots of great questions and some pretty ridiculous ones, but nothing, nothing out of the unexpected. Thank everyone. We'll see you in the township.